On this episode, we talk with senior legal correspondent Dave Lawrence to get the skinny on Thailand's new marriage equality law.
So if you want a deeper look into Thailand's surprisingly progressive move toward gender equality, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to escape the Canadian tax man, but he followed me here. However, he was forced to retreat back to Canada when I explained that Bangkok has me now.
I always thought that expression in the movie was funny.
So funny. Bangkok has me now.
It's kind of true. It happened to both. It happened to both of us.
Kind of is. Yeah.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 24 years ago. Fell in love with the realization that the neighborhood motorbike guys are mafia, but at least they're my mafia. So I never left.
That's true, man. You get the motorcycle guys on your side. They're like the key to unlocking your hood.
Totally.
They're good advocates.
No, this is a major breakthrough on my part because at first you don't pay that much attention to them. And the next step is you realize, oh my God, these guys are really important.
Yeah.
But then the next step is you start noticing maybe potentially shady things about them. Right? Yeah. But then the ultimate realization is they are your mafia. Like if you can get in good with your neighborhood motorbike guys, your quality of life will go up.
Totally. The funniest thing about motorcycle guys is when I go to the normal stop to get picked up and they're all out on other trips.
Right.
And then some dude on a motorcycle rolls up, but he doesn't have a jacket on.
Oh yeah.
And I get on and I'm like, did I just get kidnapped?
That's right.
I don't know what's going on.
No, man, they've got a lot of territoriality rules, man. I don't want to mess with that.
I'd love to get a motorcycle driver on the show to talk about this, but I don't know any that speak English. So
yeah, that's a get. If we can find a motorbike, who speaks English, that would be a great get.
Yeah.
All right, we want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get every episode a day early, behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, a heads-up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. On this week's bonus show, we chatted about my terrifying AI creations, despite trying to avoid this obvious target on our bingo card, a set of alternate Monopoly tokens for the Bangkok version of the classic game that our friend Justin Dunn sent to replace the boring ones that came with the official version, and thoughts on Greg selling his laptop on Facebook Marketplace and why the thought of doing so makes him nervous. To learn how to become a patron and get all this good stuff, plus full access to over 700 bonus and regular back episodes, click the support button at the top of our website.
That's right. And don't forget, if you listen to us on Spotify, you can now hear all of the bonus shows there as well. If you're a patron, simply link your Patreon account to your Spotify account and add our new feed titled Bangkok Podcast Badass Patrons Only to hear the regular and bonus shows in the same place.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
All right. On this episode, we sit down with our senior legal correspondent, Dave Lawrence, to discuss the recent change in Thai law that, as of January 23rd, 2025, will recognize same-sex marriage. Now, rightly hailed as a big step forward for equality and human rights, it nonetheless carries with it a lot of baggage, not only culturally and emotionally, but also legally. For instance, Thailand's citizenship laws based on marriage are famously more stringent for a foreign man married to a Thai woman than they are for a foreign woman married to a Thai man. But what happens if a foreign woman marries a Thai woman? There are a surprising amount of ripple effects to think about, and Dave walks us through a few of them as an example of how Thailand taking a giant progressive leap forward is not as simple as replacing husband and wife with spouse in the law books. Note that for the first 15 minutes or so of the interview, the computer somehow chose Dave's janky old microphone, although you can still hear him fine. But after that, it switches to his brand new shiny microphone, so you can hear the full power of Dave Lawrence's voice. So here's my chat with our pal, Dave Lawrence. All right, we are happy to be back with our Bangkok podcast senior legal correspondent, our buddy Dave Lawrence, who is joining us again to talk about a recent ruling that kind of changed the landscape of things a lot in Thailand. So, welcome back, Dave. Always good to see you.
Hey, Greg. Good to see you too.
Normally, we're sitting across the table from each other, holding beers, but unfortunately, things didn't work out that way this time. So we're sitting in our respective homes, looking through computers. A bit less personal, way more convenient, but it does lack beer. So maybe we'll get to that next time.
I think we can make it work, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Good to see you back. Well, so obviously what we're going to be talking about on this show, as you heard in the intro, is Thailand's new legalization of same-sex marriage. And that term in itself might be a bit of a minefield, and I might have overstated it, but let's just go with that for now. At the top of the show, I would like to reiterate that while Dave is an actual, moral, ethical, real, highly trained lawyer, this show is meant for entertainment and educational purposes only. Do not take this episode as actual legal advice, and if you do, I have a bridge to sell you. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So Dave, was I right in saying that Thailand has legalized same-sex marriage? Is that a correct way to sum it up?
Basically, what happened was the parliament passed a law called the Marriage Equality Act, and that was then received a royal endorsement last, I think it's September 25th. But there's a 120-day period after the signing before it comes into effect. So I think we're looking at January 22 when couples of any gender will be able to marry themselves down at the district office.
Go down to Bang Rak, the District of Love, and
I was just reading a Bangkok Post article this morning. It's a little bit dated, but there plans to be a mass marriage, about 1,000 couples on that day.
I guess you can say that'll be a gay old time. This is a great thing. It's a great step forward, and from what I understand, Thailand is the first country in Asia or Southeast Asia to have such a forward-thinking law like this, a very equitable step forward towards equality, which is, I mean, great all around. But there are probably a few minefields and snags and hiccups that need to be addressed and worked out first. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through this interview and we're going to break it down into basically 6 little sections here. We're going to talk about the history of marriage in Thailand. We're going to talk about a chapter that you titled, "Who is the Man Now?" We're going to talk about immigration and nationality, marriage and divorce, international marriages and divorce, and adoption and IVF, which are really interesting. So what's going on, man? What's the history of marriage in Thailand? And what is the structure of the new law, and how does it build off of that?
Sure. So marriage is governed under the Civil and Commercial Code that governs marriage and divorce and all sort of family matters. And traditionally, they had language in there: man, woman, husband, wife. And what they did with the act is amend Civil and Commercial Code, which is a pretty big deal in and of itself, to apply gender neutral terms such as spouse back in throughout the Civil and Commercial Code sections relating to marriage and divorce and family.
Okay.
So unlike some jurisdictions where they would set up a separate regime such as a civil union to allow same-sex couples to have approximately the same rights as traditional couples, in Thailand they've just changed the language so that everyone appears to be at first look on equal footing. So there's no difference between a marriage between a gay couple and a marriage between a traditional heterosexual couple legally.
Really? So all they did was just like do a control, find, replace on the law and change man, wife to spouse?
Or better or worse, basically, yes.
Really? And that's all it takes.
But there's some history too. I guess we could go into a little bit of the history of same-sex marriage in Thailand and recognition of Thailand. So generally speaking, a marriage, and this is a global legal standard, but a marriage conducted that is valid somewhere, for example, in the U.S., it should be valid in every country around the world. But when it came to same-sex marriage, those marriages were not recognized in Thailand because it was deemed to be against public policy.
So marriage in Thailand has always struck me as a little bit of a weird sort of side subject because it's, I don't understand all the details, but from what I know, a long time ago, women were considered almost property of men and had far fewer rights than the man did. And it was only recently, like within the 21st century, or maybe the late 20th century, that things really sort of came realigned to how they should be with full equality. But I don't know the details of that. But my feeling is that marriage in Thailand has always been slow to adapt and slow to change, and then suddenly it's like, boom, they took a leap forward and just went way past where other countries are. So how does that work in Thailand? Like, how did it change so slowly and then so quickly?
Yeah, I think it had been brewing and bubbling for a long time. There had been previous attempts, and actually a few years back, uh, there had been a court decision, an appellate court decision that everyone thought had sort of begun the legal pathway to recognition of same-sex couples, where there had been a couple that was married in the UK, a Thai guy and a British guy. They were married in the UK and they came over. He unfortunately passed. And so his Thai partner wanted to basically be the executor of his will, so that and do that as a spouse and have a right to the property. And the trial court said no, we're not going to recognize any relationship between the couple. But then it went up on appeal, and they said, well, yes, we're going to recognize some relationship. We can't call it a marriage, but we'll give you the right to administer the estate of your deceased partner. So that was sort of the high watermark before before we got here. And then there was some backtracking again. And then they went and, as you said, just Control R replaced husband and wife to the gender neutral term spouse. But getting back to your point about the difference in treatment of men and women in some areas, there's still remnants of that, in the civil and commercial code and the law, and that's brought some problems, I guess, in interpreting how this law is going to look. For example, there's a whole section on engagement and sin sought, as all of us foreign men have a problem with, and that was only typically, or before, only a man could engage a woman, and now they've changed it to a gender neutral term.
So a woman could never propose to a man?
That was how it was written.
Wow, interesting.
The English translation of the betrothal is not valid until the man gives or transfers the property to the woman.
That's the dowry. That's the sin sought, the dowry.
Yes. So I think on the bright side now, I guess we men have yet another reason to try to avoid sin sought.
Well, you've talked about this on the podcast before, but my mother-in-law is a very progressive, Western-minded woman, and I didn't give a sin sought when I got married. There was no dowry involved, so technically, I might not even be married. I'll have to bring it up with my wife and see what she thinks about it. So that's interesting. But yeah, like you said, it's there's decades where nothing happens and days where everything happens, right? So okay, so now we can pretty safely say that same-sex marriage has been legalized in Thailand, or will be when it's published in the Royal Gazette. So how is the act structured? What does it say, and is it as straightforward as it's made out to be?
So the act itself and the way it was done seems very straightforward, but then when you go through provision by provision, some things start to make less sense, that had been typically just applying to a biological male or a biological female. For example, there's a ground for divorce where if the man can't perform for a period of 1 year or more, that's a ground for divorce. So to make that gender neutral sort of may not make quite as much sense. So you get these little bits and bobs.
All right, quick audio reload there, so you might notice a bit change in the audio there, listeners. But anyway, I was saying that it's interesting how it might seem pretty straightforward. It's like, oh, just change it to your spouse. But then you have all these sub clauses like the man shall do this, and you're like, or the woman shall do this, and you're like, well, when it's two men or two women, then what does that mean, and how does that affect? It has a knock-on effect further down the line. So there's a lot of little tiny things you have to worry about as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And
to be fair, the Parliament did try to deal with that as well. So they added a few sort of catch-all provisions saying that when it comes to regulations, which we'll probably get into a bit more when we start talking about immigration and the other bits and bobs that have more to do with foreigners, and other acts that specify spouses, it sort of didn't replace them physically, didn't control R physically in the text of the document, but it said if it reads husband, you have to read it as spouse moving forward. So it's kind of
Okay.
they changed the real operative provisions of the Civil and Commercial Code, and then said, and everything else you just read it like it's gender neutral.
That's pretty good. Can you do that? Can you just say, if you see this again, assume this, just going forward? Saves us a ton of work.
Basically, and then for what it's worth, they also have instructed all agencies that have regulations to review and then modify their regulations to conform with the intention of the Marriage Equality Act. And then they added a strange bit, which is except where it's not appropriate to do so. So,
wow, that sounds pretty subjective.
it sounds very subjective, but a solid attempt nonetheless. And I think the basic parts are certainly, as you had mentioned, the basic marriage itself will withstand any sort of challenge. But it's as time goes on, you can't help but find more and more little things that may not quite work that they'll fix over time. So I don't see it being a huge problem.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I mean, it's easy to be critical or look at these with a very critical eye, but for such a big step like this, it's really great. And of course, there's going to be little hiccups and little twists and turns that maybe are no one can anticipate. But you shouldn't be too critical of those things, because anything of this size and magnitude and long-reaching effect is going to have some wrinkles in it. So that would be the case anywhere. So that's just natural, I think, for these things to work themselves out over time. Speaking of if someone had any dispute with it, maybe it's better to ask a Thai person this, but from what you know, has there been any opposition to this? Was there any like vocal anti-equality marriage people raising their voices or protesting?
I'm sure there were. I mean, it's traditional, and even there was some delay in the royal endorsement. So I think maybe there were some conversations going on behind the scenes, but I'm not aware of anything in particular. I think, like most countries, there's traditional, people that hold the very traditional values that started ringing the alarm bells, saying that this will destroy, culture or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's what they said when Elvis started shaking his hips too. So forgive me for not joining the alarm bells. So let's talk about immigration and nationality. You mentioned that was the next chapter we're going to talk about, and this is where it starts to get particularly interesting for guys like you and I. That is, foreign guys who are married to Thai women. So how did they address that particular problem? Because that seems like it might be a whole other minefield of sort of sub clauses and shortcuts, and it probably wouldn't be so straightforward to simply copy and replace a single word.
Yeah. So I mean, this might be a good time to mention that what I'm saying here isn't just coming out of my own wazoo. I sat down and took some time with a former family court judge, and as well as my own members of my legal team, and practitioners in the various fields like immigration and whatnot, to just see what their thoughts on it were.
Okay.
And from the immigration perspective, the thoughts were the laws weren't and regulations have not directly been amended, but everyone's assuming that, for example, a non-O visa, right? Which is, and I'm not an immigration. We don't do immigration work, and I'm not an expert in that. But non-O visa, for example, the spousal support visa, everyone assumes that's going to be available. I think the real question is, when will it be available, right? Because the law goes into effect on the 22nd of January next year. Will the immigration department be ready, at that point to start accepting applications, or do they have to go through a whole process then to amend and update their regulations before they're ready to do it?
Right.
So I think it's a question of when rather than if for something like immigration.
Right. Yeah, I
Um, no-
imagine that'll take some time to catch up with it. And I'm thinking back to the time when when they first came out with digital work permits for BOI companies, and I happened to have one, and I went up to the Department of Land Transport to get my driver's license renewed, and they said, "Do you have your work permit?" And I showed them the digital work permit, and no one had any idea what it was. Like,
no
it was
idea.
no idea. So I can just imagine in some office somewhere, they're like, "Do you have your marriage certificate?" And they see two men on it, they're going to go, "What?" No, 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 no. There's probably gonna it's probably going to take a while to filter throughout the provinces and all the various cants and sub districts, what have you.
Another interesting bit, and I think you know Chris, who runs Thai Citizenship.
Yeah, former guest of the show, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to go look at his website because I had heard that there was a difference if you're a foreign woman marrying a Thai man, you have an easier pathway to citizenship than if you're a foreign man
Yeah.
um, married to a Thai woman. So I took a quick look there, and so that's another example of where it's going to be a little bit strange because in a different way. Because if they just make both of the provisions gender neutral, then they'll actually just be conflicting, right? So
Right.
there'll
Right.
be two parallel pathways to citizenship, and how are they going to choose who does what? So that's kind of a kink that they're going to need to affirmatively work out, right?
Interesting. So unless they make the citizenship thing completely flat ground for both sexes, then it doesn't make sense to, or unless they address the same. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, you know, one change to a law over here can totally screw up this long-standing law over here, and then they come into conflict. And which one do you choose? Yeah.
So we have that one. Another one we found. This is regarding a foreign couple divorcing. So there's an act. We might get a little bit too legal here, but there's an act in Thailand called the Conflict of Laws Act, and the Conflict of Laws deals with, well, basically that international conflicts of laws and how they're resolved. And there's a particular provision saying that, sorry, if a foreign husband and wife wish to get divorced, the law of the husband's country controls.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so if you have a same-sex couple, who's the husband, right? And
Interesting.
so how do you resolve that? In the local, I think how when we were looking at the local law, it appears that the one who asks to engage the other one, the one who proposes, will be generally considered the husband spouse thingamabobber, and then the other
Really?
one would be So it's a little bit. So there's some kookiness that's bound to have to go through the system, but there.
That's so funny. It's so funny because, one of the oldest jokes is, if two guys are gay and they go to dance, like who leads? Who's leading in the dance? So it's like an old cheesy joke, but there actually is real ramifications for questions like that when it comes to legal things. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, it was actually fun going through this with the team. Although it is, I mean, I don't make light of it because it's quite a serious issue that impacts a lot of people,
Definitely.
but just the bizarre conclusions that laws sometimes lead us to is just interesting to see.
Yeah, no kidding. One thing I want to ask about is adoption and surrogacy, because I happen to have two very good friends who are a gay couple, and they had a surrogate mother in South America, and they now have a beautiful son at home. Two guys who are married, and maybe they'll come on the show sometime in the future to talk about their experiences. But how did they address that whole subject when this law was changed?
So a few years back, they ended up tightening up the restrictions on IVF, which had been the main, sort of pathway to surrogacy. So I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think they basically outright banned surrogacy. And then for IVF treatment, they only allowed married couples to participate in fertility clinics and whatnot.
Only married couples.
So from that perspective, it looks like then, I mean, who's egg and who's sperm, and how whose goods are we allowed to use now under the new
Well,
under the new law?
hey, come on! What came
Um,
first, the chicken or the egg? We're not going to solve that now. It's been asked for thousands of years. No amount of
so
lawyers thrown at that problem are going to come up with a solution.
for lesbian couples, I think it's a simpler process because you have someone who can presumably become pregnant and bear children. So that would be a sperm donor situation. But for gay men, couples, again, if surrogacy is prohibited, then much as your friends probably did, they would have to go out of the country. I imagine the situation that they'd be in now is where only one of them is the legal parent of the child.
Oh, wow, interesting.
So that can change now. That will change, right? That's well. So now both parties can adopt the child, not just one.
Oh, good. Okay, wow.
So it'll be a full. And I say this as an adoptee myself, that it would be quite strange where you to have only one legal parent, but still functioning as a family.
Yeah, no kidding. Let me step outside this conversation a little bit, but onto sort of a parallel track. So yeah, now we're thinking like, what happens if someone transitions to be a man and then marries another man and they want to adopt the child? I mean, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? My God, this gets very complex.
At the same time, I think it's not, because it's gender neutral. So if someone transitions, it's not going to affect the status of the marriage. It's not going to affect anyone can marry anyone basically now. So
Right, but if you transition from, say, a woman to a man, then does Thai law still see you as a man, or does it see you as a woman? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, these are all hypotheticals and devil's advocate questions that I'm asking.
Yes.
There's one other question I wanted to ask, and it came up previously when we were talking about the show, and there was like some insane rule or law that said a widow can't get remarried until a certain number of days have passed after her husband has died. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this is, a throwback to maybe not a throwback, but yeah, the period of time I think is 340 days, and that is approximately 9 months, right? So so in case his last act, or if perhaps he died in the bed with her.
Oh, what a way to go.
And just happened to impregnate her, we have to be completely sure that didn't happen. So there's a waiting period before a widow can get remarried.
Oh man.
And again, so where does that really function now on gender neutral language, where there may not be where the widow may not be able to become pregnant by the.
So like just two women in the same sex marriage, one of them dies, is the remaining one still prevented from getting remarried, even though there's probably no
provided she wasn't the spouse who asked the other one for the engagement, or who proposed to the other one, because then she would be the
or she was
husband-like individual, perhaps
the leader of the dance, or she was a surrogate carrying someone else's sperm from another country. Yeah, wow.
So there's still these remnants from the past as well, that don't adapt quite so easily to this as you aptly put it, Control R method of amending the law.
Right. There's so many questions.
Since you brought that up, let's move kind of onto the topic of inheritance and that. So typically in the law of pretty much everywhere, a husband and wife traditionally, or a married couple, have what's called marital property and non-marital property, right? So anything acquired after the date of the marriage is presumed to be marital property. So before this amendment comes into effect, or had come into effect, then same-sex couples would have to enter into a complicated set of agreements, typically to simulate or approximate what would be marital property or common property, and they would not have an automatic right to inherit that upon the death of their partner. Yeah. So now in this case, all couples that have registered their marriage will have the ability to have that common property and marriage property. So that it just leads for more security and stability for couples, with less legal complications, which appears to be a benefit.
I really wonder what a lot of the private sector is doing about this. Like, what are the banks doing to change their contracts and the language in their things they enter into, these deals they enter into with customers or companies, and who's in charge and what happens in the case of an emergency. What does the driving regulations say? insurance companies do, because they have different rates for men and women and married couples and things like this. There's so many little tendrils that go out into other areas that you might not have to think about, obviously.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I had asked I went to an HR seminar, and there was a very well experienced HR guy there, Thai guy, and I asked him, how is this affecting your policies, and what changes have you had to make? And he said, not much. They're married, no problem. We'll just treat them the same. I said, okay.
Good.
That's actually, yeah, that's he said we basically did anyway before. You could so more, I guess, more progressive companies let you name anyone you want as a partner regardless of the law.
Okay.
Insurance companies, I think, have more more regulations and whatnot, so that might be a little bit more complicated. But again, a marriage is a marriage, so that's that's why I think the main strength of the Thai Act, as opposed to setting up a civil union regime or something like that, is a marriage is a marriage now. So it actually simplifies most of the transactions and most of the legal questions that you have.
Let me ask you about taxes, because at the end of the year, when the tax season comes around, my wife and I file separately. It's probably just easier and less of a headache that way. But a lot of people file jointly, and that's a big, big thing at the end of the year. There's a lot of advantages to that. There's some disadvantages to that, depending on your situation. How does that affect this new thing?
All signs point to being able to claim the standard deduction and whatnot. And for as a husband and wife, they'll change it to as spouses. And so I think getting back to the point that a marriage is a marriage, then you can expect to be treated as a married couple by the Revenue Department as well.
It seems like they really put a lot of work into this, and a lot of forethought went into making sure this was the right decision and would go forward in the right way. Like it wasn't just done willy-nilly. It was done with consideration of people's lives and feelings and emotions and relationships. Like it doesn't sound like this was a law crafted by cold bureaucrats, to increase X or whatever like that. Like this was a real human step forward by people who wanted to, who were guided by equality. That's what I'm seeing from this.
I do hope that's the case.
Maybe I'm too optimistic, but it sounds like.
But without a doubt, the impact is massive and good, right? It puts everyone on equal legal footing, which is, I think it comes closer than a lot of other countries and places for out of the water.
Excellent. Do you think other countries in the region, Malaysia, Vietnam, other countries are looking at Thailand and going, oh, maybe this is the way we should all sort of be thinking? Is it going to affect anything or lead the way in this regard?
Yeah, I would say where you have different religious traditions, there might be more blockages towards it. And Thailand always has been more of a sort of doing their own thing kind of place, e.g., marijuana deregulation, complete deregulation, which maybe they'll walk back from. So yeah, it's hard. You can't. It's hard to predict what other countries will do compared to what Thailand is doing, because it always seems to just kind of make its own way.
Well, I think that's a really good way to end it, because Thailand is, and we've talked about this on the show so many times, but Thailand is so pragmatic and so practical that they do something and it might not be immediately the right thing, or it might be the right step, but in the slightly wrong direction. But I think eventually, generally, things get figured out for the better somehow, magically. So even if there are hiccups and wrinkles along the way, I think that they will eventually get sorted out. And I don't think anyone's going to lose their mind over it. Like if there's a problem, no one's going to freak out and say, scrap the whole thing. They're going to say, all right, well, let's just solve this thing here in a very pragmatic way and then keep going forward. So that's what I hope anyway. And that's what it seems like, that if the Thailand will manage to solve any bumps in the road in a very pragmatic fashion.
I think you're onto something.
The joke about lawyers is that they all support gay marriage, of course, because that means double the work. Then you can get a lot of business with gay divorce too, and gay wills and gay settlements and gay inheritance and what have you. But
fully support, Greg. Fully support.
Of course you do. Of course you do. one thing I want to finish on though, and I'm curious. So now, like, we're sort of in this, is interregnum the right word? I don't know, the period between when the law was, I guess, written and approved and the law taking effect. So we're sort of like in this no man's land now. What happens if, for instance, hypothetically, you and I decided to take a drastic change in our lifestyles and we went to Canada, had a bender and got married in Canada, and then we came back to Thailand? Would we be married in Thailand if we got a gay same-sex marriage certificate in another country?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and this was the question main question I talked about when I was talking to that former family court judge, and his position was, I think, a reasonable one, which is gay marriages conducted abroad were not recognized in Thailand previously because it was against public policy.
Okay.
But now there's no argument that they're against public policy, even though law hasn't come into effect. The policy has already changed, right? It's been endorsed royally, and the law has come into effect. So the position that we sort of came to is that if you were a couple married abroad, a gay couple married abroad, you could probably file a divorce case here in Thailand now before the law actually comes into effect.
Boy, talk about soft power, hey? Like, come and get your divorce.
Get your divorce. So if any of your listeners are interested,
the hub of
to be the first
same-sex divorces. Yeah.
To be the first in Thailand.
What if we
Let's give it a shot.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that if you and I went on a bender in Canada and got married, that we could come back and maybe annul our terrible mistake. That's really interesting, Dave. Thanks so much for talking about it. And I had no idea that it affected, like, I had no idea that it was such a simple change. Like, they basically said, change husband or wife to just spouse. Okay, job done. But then I had no idea that it also became much more complicated and spread its little fingers touching 100 different other areas. So I imagine there's a lot of legal geeks and finance geeks and paperwork geeks and policy geeks who are very, very busy right now making sure that all of the little things it touches have the right language in them to make sure there's no hiccups. So it's amazing to think what's going on.
I really hope that's the case. If not, then we'll just sort of muddle our way through like we do.
Always do. Like they always do, yeah. Well, Dave, thanks so much for coming on. It's really interesting stuff. Where can people find you online if they want some advice on finally being allowed to get married?
Well, if they want to have a question, they want to reach out to me and the team, they can definitely go to my Twitter handle at yarpegleg.
Yarpegleg. I love it.
It's the easiest way to get a hold of me, and then we can happy to help out anyone that needs some help.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, man. Good to talk to you, even though it's only through a computer. And next time, let's make sure to get that beard going.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Greg.
All right. Thanks, Dave. We'll talk to you soon.
Man, this is such great news. You and I have talked about it before, but Thailand has lived through so many political problems, and we had the military government for a long time, and even they started talking about this, proposing it, but the law is very, very, very slow, and it's just great to see after, I don't know, we probably, I can't even remember, but we had one of my former students on talking about this issue. I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, I remember that
5-6 years ago, something like that. It's so basically we're almost there. January 23rd, 2025. It's about time.
January 23rd will be. I believe we talk about it in the show. I think it's 120 days since the law was appeared in the Royal Gazette, which is how long it takes for a law to go from being published to coming into effect. But yeah, it's great, man. And it's one of these things, it's like one of these good surprises that I've had in Thailand. Every once in a while, I talked on the show before about how I never in a million years thought they'd turn the tobacco monopoly into a park.
Right.
Because that land is just too valuable.
Right.
But they went ahead and did it. And I was wrong. And I was very happy to be wrong.
That's a good show. Actually, that's a good show idea. Things that we think would never happen. Again, the
things we were happy to be wrong about.
well, that's a good. That's good. You know, the weed changes. If you would have told me back in the day that weed was going to get legalized here, I would have thought you were crazy.
Right. And the same with same-sex marriage by a bunch of crusty old, 90-year-old men.
That's right. That's right.
who probably are not the most progressive minds in the world. They came up with this great new law. So kudos to them.
Well,
big change.
I think it fits with, in some ways, Thailand is conservative, but Thai people are so chill and kind of tolerant in many other ways that in a way it kind of makes sense.
It kind of does. It had a very soft landing culturally in terms of
That's right.
How places like America or even Canada. It was a rough go for a long time.
Yeah.
It seems to sort of fit nicely into dovetail into Thailand's culture.
I mean, as far as I know, I don't know. It's been a long legal battle here, and I know there was some resistance, but nothing like in the West. In the West where you have more
people freaking out.
Well, you have hardcore evangelicals and who are like virulently or violently, almost violently against it. And I know there was some opposition in Thailand, but not extreme.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's also I'm glad we got into it too with Dave, because I never thought about the marriage implications and the tax implications, because a lot of the bureaucracy and laws in Thailand are written specifically for men and women, because there's still some laws on the books
so
that
complicated.
Are different for different sexes.
That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, this is I am no longer a lawyer, but I used to be. And I learned this lesson just back in the day that laws are all interlocking, and then there's precedents and cases that apply to certain situations. And so I'm not surprised that when you change one thing, all of a sudden, how does it affect this case or that case? Or
right.
I mean, this is how the law works. But the bottom line is, once it's done, and then all those other problems will get solved subsequently.
Right. And like we said in the interview, Thailand has always been a very practical country. So even if there's any problems or wrinkles, they'll eventually get smoothed out. Might take a while, but it'll happen. No big deal. Chill. Sabai.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, as we said many times, there are no laws in Thailand until there are laws. But but what I mean is that they tend to be flexible on a lot of stuff. I mean, certain things, they're strangely inflexible, but most of the time, I would say they're pretty flexible.
Right. Well, thanks, Dave, for sitting down with us to talk about that. Very interesting stuff. And we'll have you back on here next time to talk about the next legal issue that's grabbing all the headlines and leaving us with bated breath in Thailand.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. All right, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we discuss to decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. And this week, Ed, I got something for you that's very, very fluffy. It's not really, not hardcore. It's not
I can do fluff.
Serious.
I can do fluff.
Yeah, you're a bit of a fluffer. So I was noticing the other day, I was standing in line somewhere, and I was looking around the little room I was in, and I noticed they still had all of the New Year's decorations and garlands and things up from last year.
From last year?
Yeah. So they didn't put them up for this year. They were clearly up for a long time.
Oh,
the tape was all old and
stuff.
That's
brutal.
So my question is, like, you see this a lot around, like the decorations, like Happy New Year or Merry Christmas, the garlands and the shiny plastic things. They often just stay up permanently. What do you see these things and go like, oh, Jesus, take these things down, take care of your house? Or do you sort of say, it's joyful to keep these things up? Why not? They're colorful and they're bright, and let's have a little bit of fun.
No, it's I don't know if I would be a loathe. It doesn't bother me that much, but it's pretty lame. It's pretty lame. That's the best way to explain it. You know what this makes me think of? I guess it's related. It might have been pre-COVID. I can't remember exactly the date, but I think it was about 3 years ago. At my university, I organized a photo exhibit. I like to take pictures. I happen to know a lot of students like to take pictures, and so we did a photo exhibit show of just student photographs. And I made flyers, and the university put them up all over the place. And I still see some of those flyers, and
Oh no.
and it drives me crazy. I'll be walking down the hall, and I'll look over, and there's a flyer from my photo exhibit from 3 years ago, and that bugs me. I'm like, who, in this case, I submitted a flyer, and then there's people, staff, and I'm like, but they don't take them down. Like, what? They can't see the date. They can't see the date
No doubt.
on the flyer.
Why would you like? Why would you possibly leave that
It's
up?
still
Like,
hanging.
It just looks...
No, it's still from 3 years. Like, the date is like, come here, or like, in 2021. It's so, yeah, I don't like that. But okay, decorations are a little bit different, but I still think it's kind of lame. You got to put it up and put it down. That makes it special. If you leave it up, it's not special.
Ooh, that's very good. That's very deep. That's like a girl in high school wrote a poem and gave it to me, and one of the lines was, "If everyone is special, no one is." And I thought it was the deepest thing I'd ever heard in my life to that point.
That's so funny.
But,
well, it's kind of true though. It's like the point is it's supposed to be up for a week, something like that.
yeah, I'm the same with you. I'm a little bit of I'm a live with. On one hand, it's like
I'm a live with,
it
but it's kind of lame.
It adds to the kitsch, but come on.
Yeah,
let's
agreed.
Let's take it down.
Agreed.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
A final thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping in our never-ending quest for cool content. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
That's right. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. Send us a voicemail through our website that we'll feature on the show. Hit me up on Threads at BKKGreg. Well, I've been hearing a lot about Blue Sky lately. Maybe soon we'll be able to find me on Blue Sky.
Ooh.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Take it easy. We'll see you back here next week.
No doubt.